I'm a Yosemite Park ranger. Some hikers never leave Cathedral Lake. I'd like to thank the author Grupe for allowing me to narrate his story. He also has a YouTube channel filled with scary original stories, so please be sure to check him out. Links are in the description. Now on to the story. The job of Yosemite Park Ranger isn't what most people imagine. A lot of people picture us as law enforcement types, handing out tickets and enforcing park rules, when really that's a very niche aspect of it. Mostly we're just here to assist you. Handing out maps, not speeding tickets, and giving people directions to the best views or to ideal camping locations. We remind people about safety and weather conditions from day to day. But the main thing we do, and this is more vital than people realize, is that we're just here in case anyone gets lost or hurt. We deal with a lot of belligerent people who like to think the park is their personal playground where they can do whatever they want. It's my job to remind them to follow the rules, to dispose of their trash properly, to pick up after their dog, and to clip its leash back on while walking the trails. Some people take this as a personal assault on their freedoms, when really I'm just looking out for the safety of other visitors, like cyclists and horseback riders who share the paths. Dogs can be unpredictable and can misbehave on trails, and we have to look out for everyone. Still, I don't often get a lot of positive feedback for enforcing the rules. Nobody likes to be told what to do. Trust me, I get it. Every once in a while something interesting happens to break up the boredom and monotony of the job. Last summer I was walking around at night, doing a patrol of the campgrounds, when I saw something rustling around, in the bushes. A guy came crawling out, dressed in a furry dog costume. I asked him if he was okay, and he just barked happily, then crawled away in the opposite direction. Shortly afterwards, I saw him chasing another person who was dressed as a cat. A woman, who went scampering away and hid beneath a camper van, laughing excitedly and making purring sounds, licking the dirt from her fur pants with a long tongue. She saw me watching and clawed the air in front of her face, hissing territorially. It's not how I would choose to spend my Friday nights, but I'm not one to judge. By far the most interesting thing which has ever happened to me at Yosemite occurred last summer. And it wasn't just interesting. It was utterly terrifying. Every night when I fall asleep I have nightmares about that day. Every time I close my eyes, I picture those dark tunnels in the rock face. It all started when someone called in a report saying they were out on the Cathedral Lake Trail when their brother went missing. The pair had been out hiking when they got separated somehow. At first we thought it was just a routine mishap. People go missing in Yosemite all the time. It's no big deal in most cases, since usually the missing parties are found quickly enough. Half the time alcohol is involved, and I have to remind people to pace themselves if they indulge while camping. But every once in a while those missing people don't turn up, and we have to dispatch much larger search parties. In this case I went out on my own at first, heading to where the man had called us from. I drove out on an ATV, since it was a 16-mile round trip. When I got there, the guy looked frantic. He ran over to me and started speaking way too fast to understand. I told him to slow down and just give me the facts. It's important to stay calm in these types of situations. The guy took a deep breath and let it out. Then he started talking again, a bit slower this time. We were walking on the trail. He was right beside me. Then I turned around to look at the lake, and when I looked back he was gone. Just gone. I tried to get a sense if the man had been drinking or doing drugs. It's not that I'm trying to assume the worst in people, but we have to think of these types of things. The simplest explanation is usually the right one after all. And it was much easier to imagine the two brothers taking sips from a Mickey and one of them getting separated, than to imagine one of them being abducted by aliens, or taken in a very selective rapture. Slow down for a second. Take some deep breaths. What's your name? Let's start with that. Greg, he said. His face was turning a shade less purple as he began to inhale air with trembling breaths in and out. "Okay, Greg." I took out my notepad, jotting this down, along with his last name, which I'll leave out for the sake of privacy. "And what's your brother's name?" "Dave," he said, sniffling. I saw he had been crying recently. "Where was the last place you saw your brother? Let's retrace your steps." He started protesting, saying that wasn't going to help, but I convinced him we had to at least try. Greg led me back a little ways to where he'd seen his brother last. "I walked back here already. And I looked all around here before calling you guys. I thought maybe he went off the trail to take a leak and tripped, hit his head. Something like that. I don't know." I was grasping at straws. "But I think something." He hesitated. "Something what?" I probed. "Do you think something took him? Like those stories you hear about?" He sounded embarrassed, but I tried to get more out of him and asked him which stories he was talking about. "You hear stories about Yosemite and other national parks. I'm sure you've heard about them, even if you're not in on the conspiracy. Stories where people go missing like this, and it makes no sense. Someone turns their back for a second and their son or their sister or whoever is just gone. Disappeared. Like Dave. I saw it on YouTube." "All right," I replied, not sure what corner of the internet this guy had been visiting. "Well, that doesn't happen around here, I can assure you. Let's keep looking, I'm sure he'll turn up." But the longer we looked, the less we found. It really did seem like the man's brother had just vanished. I was about to call in for more support, maybe even K9 units, when the man yelled from a little ways off the trail, saying he'd found something. Following the sound of his voice, I eventually came to find him at the base of the mountain, face to face with the granite wall. At first I didn't understand what he was doing there, but as I got closer I saw there was actually a cave which was well hidden in the rock face. It blended in perfectly with the mountainside until you were almost nose to nose with the pale gray stone. "Good job," I said, patting him on the shoulder. But then I looked at our surroundings, getting nervous. We were pretty far from the path, in the thick part of the forest which was overgrown and tangled with vines and shrubbery. "Do you think he would have gone into this cave on his own?" Greg looked around, as if checking to see if his brother had left a message for him. But there was nothing. "I don't think so. It's not like him to just leave me on the trail alone. Especially not for this long. If this was a prank or something, he'd have come back by now. I can tell something's not right." "Has your brother played pranks like this before?" I asked. The man was in his 20s, and his brother was probably of a similar age. Young men occasionally got lost or injured trying to scare each other by pulling pranks or filming videos in the woods. It was rare, but it had happened before. "Once or twice," he admitted. "I didn't call you guys for a while because I thought he was messing with me. I wouldn't put it past him. But not for this long." I was getting annoyed. Mosquitoes were biting my neck and I was sweating in the heat of the afternoon, after marching through the foliage for hours. I imagined the guy hiding inside the cave trying to scare his younger brother. Maybe he had fallen asleep in his dark hiding place or he was just pushing it too far, but either way, I was upset. If this was a prank, it had wasted most of my afternoon. It probably annoyed me even more because I had my own older brother who had played tricks on me more than once in our younger days, and this was bringing back memories. "You can come out of there right now," I yelled, marching into the cave, thinking the young man would be hiding in the small alcove. I turned a corner and saw a dark tunnel, leading deep into the darkest recesses of the granite. This made no sense. As far as I knew, there was no tunnel in this location. Especially not one of this size. But it had been well hidden. Nearly invisible in the rock face. I wondered if anyone knew about it. And I wondered if it was safe. I didn't feel comfortable going any further. The dark space looked like it went on for a long way into the distance, and I was getting an eerie feeling standing there. It felt like I could almost hear voices whispering from all around me. The words were lost in the echoing cave, and I got a strong sensation that we weren't alone, like icy fingers walking slowly up my spine. The other man came in behind me, marveling at the cave for a second before continuing to press forward. "Come on," Greg said, forging ahead. He might be in trouble. He was anxious to keep going. Not scared enough of this horrifying place with whispering voices coming from the shadows. And his apparent lack of fear made me twice as scared. "I'm going back for help," I said, shuffling backwards. "It isn't safe. Nobody knows we're here." My training and my instincts were overwhelming my curiosity, but Greg seemed not to care about the dangers. The man continued going forward, disappearing into the darkness. A few seconds later he was gone, and there was no indication he had ever existed in the first place. "Greg?" I called out into the black abyss. There was no response. He might as well have been a ghost. An overwhelming urge to follow him rushed over me, and I took a few steps forward, feeling hypnotized by that black tunnel leading on and on forever. But then I shook my head, slapping my face, trying to wake myself up from whatever trance I was in, which was overruling my common sense. I turned around and left the cave, my legs shaking and my hands unsteady as I called for assistance. After meeting the search party back at the trail, we went through the woods again to find the cave hiding within the 10,000-foot-tall rock face of Cathedral Peak. But it was gone. I remembered having trouble finding it the first time, and thinking it was well hidden among the pale gray surface of the mountainside. You had to be nearly face to face with the wall to see it, since it was so invisible among the crags and boulders. I tried to tell my supervisor and the other members of the search party, but they didn't believe me. They said there was no tunnel there. They looked for hours and found nothing. Helicopters swept the area and more teams with more dogs, bloodhounds, and German shepherds. But nothing was turned up. There was no trace of anyone else having been out there, except me. Dumbfounded for the rest of the week, and for the rest of the summer, I couldn't focus on anything. My mind kept going back to that conversation I'd had with the man on the trail named Greg. The man who'd lost his brother and then disappeared into a cave that didn't exist. More and more, I began to wonder what would have happened if I'd followed him. It took a full year for me to build up the courage to go back out to that exact spot again. It happened to be on the same date, and around the same time of day. Only this time, I wasn't on duty. It was my weekend off, so I had plenty of time to comb the area for clues. My backpack was full of provisions, and I had enough to last for a night or two in the woods, maybe longer if necessary. Somehow I knew. I just had a feeling that if I went back on that day at that time it would be there. The cave that didn't exist. Cathedral Peak loomed above me, getting larger as I made my way through the forest, moving toward it. The gray clouds above were shrouding the sun in darkness, while the thickening canopy blocked any remaining light from overhead. A chill ran through me, causing me to shiver involuntarily as I laid eyes on the black hole in the rock face, so plain and clear to see now. Taking a step forward, I found myself standing right in front of it, and I reached up my hands to feel the outline of the entryway, as if to confirm it was real. It was. I took a deep breath, like a diver about to submerge, and went inside. The air was cold and damp, with a strange, coppery smell. My flashlight was on my belt and I grabbed it, but then decided not to turn it on. I was getting a strange feeling, like I was in an unsafe place, and needed to stay silent and hidden. There was a sound, coming from up ahead which I couldn't place. It was a slurping, chewing sound. Like someone tearing meat from bones with their teeth. As I went deeper and deeper into the tunnel, the air became colder, and so damp that I felt droplets of water running down my face and into my eyes. A trickle of light was filtering in somewhere as well, causing the cavern to faintly glow in places. The air seemed to shimmer and dance in front of my eyes as I went deeper and deeper, feeling entranced as I stumbled along in the shadows. Faintly I realized that there was something wrong with me, as if I had been drugged, but I no longer cared. In fact, I found the sensation to be quite pleasant. And then I was abruptly awoken from my daydream as I came around a corner and saw the horror unfolding within the guts of Cathedral Peak. I can't possibly explain what I saw down there. And the shadows obscured most of it, drenching the monstrous creature in darkness. But the impression I got was of something like an octopus or a squid, crossbred with an oversized plant or a fungus, sucking and slurping, chewing and crunching something between its teeth. After a few moments of inspection, I realized it was a person's face that was being eaten, as the details could just barely be seen in the dim light of the cave. The skin was being stripped from its cheeks, the eyelids ripped off, and the lips peeled back and slurped up like noodles. Tentacles like tangled vines were everywhere, slithering and sliding across the pale gray stone floor, all around me. At first I thought it was mud beneath my feet, but as I came fully to my senses, I realized it was blood mingling and mixing with dust, creating a dark toxic red slurry which sucked at my boot heels. The tentacle vine things were everywhere, I realized with numb shock. My feet were actually stepping on some of them, and I was amazed the creature hadn't noticed me yet. But it was obviously too caught up with whatever meal it was currently ingesting. Feeling very glad I hadn't turned on my flashlight, I began to back away very slowly, my boots crunching across the writhing tentacles. A sick knot in my stomach was rising up and threatening to make me puke, fear and revulsion twisting my gut. My mind was spinning and my thoughts were racing, understanding there was a very good chance I would never leave this place. I tried desperately not to step on any more of the squirming, writhing tentacles which moved and twisted on the floor of the cave, soaking and basking in the blood which had been spilled everywhere, like pigs rolling happily in the mud. There was no possible way there could be so much of it, I thought. No one person has this much blood. This is like a river. And then I saw the others. They were suspended from the ceiling, from the walls, from everywhere. Amidst the purple vine tentacles, they breathed in and out, still being kept alive, but just barely. Dozens of them were strung up and down the length of the cave, their chests rising and falling with weak breaths, but none of them opening their eyes or speaking. It was like they were sleeping. After a few long moments of searching, I found him. Greg, the hiker from the trail who was looking for his brother. He was hanging upside down from the wall just beside me, his eyes closed. Parts of him were missing, a piece of his cheek, part of his hand. But the wounds were slowly healing. The creature, whatever it was, kept its victims alive down there, I realized. It was ingesting them slowly, perhaps even using pieces of its other victims as nutrients to feed the ones who were dying of starvation, like an otherworldly pyramid scheme built of blood and human remains. Shaking that mental image away, I grabbed Greg's shoulder, hoping to wake him up quietly. His eyes shot open a second after I touched him, revealing only the whites, and he began to screech. And I don't mean screeching like he was screaming out of fear of pain or anything like that. This was an inhuman alarm cry which signified to me immediately that there was no shred of humanity left in him. He was now a part of the hive mind of the creature and its tentacle army. As his head turned on a swivel, I saw smaller tentacles were wrapped around him, going into his brain and into his neck, invading his ears and eyes, and drilled into his spinal column. I screamed involuntarily, seeing these details, and heard the creature in the tunnel as it recognized my presence. It wasn't fast, whatever it was, but it was huge. The cave shook around me, dust and pebbles falling from the stone ceiling above as I backed away from the hiker. Beneath my feet the vines were suddenly moving quickly, sliding around so that I couldn't find my balance. As soon as my shoes found purchase on the stone floor beneath me, I began to run. The tunnel was alive all around me now. The whipping vines twisting and bending toward me, reaching out like greedy hands trying to grab me as I raced past. Looking over my shoulder, I saw the amorphous creature's central girth was finding its way through the cave and was moving my way a lot faster than I would have thought possible. But then again, I wouldn't have thought any of this was possible before living it. The light of the entryway was just up ahead, and I could smell the fresh air, and could see the sun. Then my feet suddenly slipped as if someone had pulled a rug out from under me, and I went crashing to the ground face first. My jaw closed hard and bit the end of my tongue, causing it to bleed, the taste of copper filling my mouth a second later. I tried to get to my feet. The mental image of those trapped people could be seen clearly in my mind's eye. In retrospect, I think the creature, whatever it was, needed us to be unsuspecting. If we were aware of what it was doing, its hypnosis wouldn't work. Maybe it was a chemical or pheromone it released, like insects used to communicate, which caused people to explore the cave. But it didn't work as well if you knew about it, and if you understood its purpose. It released some more of that pheromone or whatever chemical it was using to lure people in, and I actually felt my legs grow a bit heavier. My eyelids too. It was like I had suddenly just worked 3 night shifts, and really needed to sleep. But then the wave of hypnosis passed and I felt the rumbling of the ground beneath me, and that broke me from the trance again, causing me to scramble to my feet from the cave floor and run. As I neared the cave entrance and sprinted toward it, leaving my backpack far behind in an effort to lighten the load, I saw the rocks were actually closing in, tightening the gap. The entryway was shrinking somehow. It was the vines, I realized. They were what was camouflaging the entrance, their color changing to match the pale gray stone. I picked up my pace, the twisting forms beneath me making it even more difficult. I didn't dare risk a glance over my shoulder, feeling the rumbling of the floor and knowing that the bulk of the creature was just behind me, closing in. With the gap of the exit narrowing even further, shrinking to the size of a dartboard, I dove headfirst into it, imagining my face slamming into a sheer rock wall as it suddenly turned to stone right in front of me, sealing me in this dark labyrinth of suffering forever with the rest of these tortured souls. My eyes were squinted tightly shut as I felt the vines pulling and tearing at me as I went through the gap. For a moment, they squeezed in around my midsection, threatening to stop me like Winnie the Pooh after an unfortunate attempt at pilfering honey. Then I popped out of the hole and it sealed up behind me in an instant. I heard a loud crash as the creature flew headlong into its own obstruction. The trap it had created for me to keep me there had hindered its escape, preventing it from chasing after me. I could hear it thrashing and clawing at the vines, desperate for more flesh to sustain itself. Whatever it was growing too large even for its own control. Left alone to feed in the heart of the mountain, it would eventually destroy itself. It would consume its own flesh to sate its monstrous hunger, like a snake eating its own tail. I had a very strong suspicion that it was true. With that very specific idea in mind, I wandered back to my car. It was easier now without the backpack and all the gear. But the walk back to the cave would be harder. There would be lots to carry next time. After a trip to the hardware store, I went back out to the trail. It was nighttime now, and the place was abandoned. I borrowed one of the Ranger ATVs and took my supplies out to the spot where the cave had been. After bringing a few buckets of water from the lake, I began my work. Since I had marked the cave, it was easy to find it again, and to begin laying down the fast-drying cement. As park rangers, our job is usually to stop people from vandalizing mountains in this way, but I got the feeling Mother Nature would forgive me. It was my job to protect this place, and the people who visited. And nothing could protect people from this thing. It was best to seal it away forever, and let it slowly consume itself. Without a fresh supply of hikers, it would eventually run out of calories. It would eventually expire. It was only a matter of time. The vine tentacles squirmed beneath the layer of cement, groggily reaching out for me, trying to pull me in. I grabbed the trowel and slopped on another thick coating and watched as it rapidly began to dry, and the tentacles began to smooth out and settle down again, falling back asleep. That inhuman shriek could be heard from inside, much louder this time, as if all of the hikers who the creature had abducted had all woken up at the same instant, and for just a second, realized their predicament. "Sorry, Greg," I muttered to myself alone in the dark forest. "I told you not to go in there."